The man snapped his fingers inches from Daniel Brooks' face, sharp and impatient, the sound cracking through the first-class cabin like a dry branch breaking in winter. "You need to get up now," he said. "These seats are for paying customers." For a moment, the entire cabin seemed to stop breathing. The aircraft door was still open. The low mechanical hum of ground power vibrated through the floor. Somewhere near the galley, a coffee cup rattled faintly against a saucer. No one laughed. No one spoke. A woman halfway down the aisle froze with her phone hovering above her lap, screen glowing. Forgotten. Daniel did not move. He sat in seat 1A, shoulders relaxed, hands resting loosely on his thighs. His hoodie was charcoal grey, soft, unbranded, the kind of fabric that looked ordinary until you touched it. Cashmere, Italian, quiet money. The hood lay flat against his back, untouched. His breathing was slow, measured, controlled. Beside him, Rachel Brooks stiffened. Her fingers tightened around his hand. She felt the change immediately, the way the air went thin, the way attention collapsed inward like a vacuum. Her eyes lifted to the man standing over them, then flicked briefly around the cabin. Dozens of faces. Curious, appraising. Some already decided. The man who had snapped his fingers wore a navy suit that shined too much under the cabin lights, like it had been polished for effect rather than wear. His tie was loosened. His jaw was tight. His confidence came from being obeyed without question for most of his adult life. His name was Ethan Caldwell. He was 34. He had never been told no in a way that mattered. "You hear me?" Ethan said, louder now. He leaned in, close enough that Daniel could smell expensive cologne layered over impatience. "I need that seat." Daniel lifted his eyes. Not quickly, not slowly, just enough. His gaze was steady, dark, calm. The kind of calm that unsettles people who feed on reaction. He looked at Ethan the way a judge looks at a defendant who doesn't yet understand the weight of the room. "This is my seat," Daniel said. His voice was low, even, not confrontational, not apologetic. A ripple moved through the cabin. Ethan scoffed, a short laugh pushed out through his nose. "Come on, man. Don't make this awkward. You know how this works." He straightened and gestured around them with one hand, sweeping the cabin like evidence. Wide leather seats, polished wood trim, champagne flutes already waiting in their cradles. First class. Rachel felt heat rise in her chest. 20 years of being polite. 20 years of swallowing moments like this. She opened her mouth. Daniel squeezed her hand once. A small pressure. A signal. Not yet. At the front of the cabin, a flight attendant had gone very still. Her name tag read Karen Miller. She was 38, hair pulled back tight enough to show intention. Her posture changed as she took in the scene, eyes flicking from Ethan's suit to Daniel's hoodie, then to Rachel's simple beige coat. Karen had been trained to read passengers quickly, to categorize, to prioritize. She had learned over years who caused problems and who made them disappear. She stepped forward, smile already forming, practiced and thin. "Is there an issue here?" Ethan turned toward her, like a man reaching for home field advantage. Yeah, there is. He pointed at Daniel without looking back. I need that seat. Row 1. Bulkhead. I've got a legging thing. Karen glanced at Daniel's boarding pass, still tucked neatly in his hand. She did not ask to see it. She didn't need to. Her eyes moved to the hoodie again. She felt the familiar internal calculation begin, fast and efficient. Who complains louder? Who escalates faster? Who gets written up if this goes sideways? Sir, Karen said, turning slightly toward Daniel, her smile flattening. There seems to be a discrepancy. Daniel tilted his head just a fraction. There isn't. Karen's eyes hardened. Let's keep our voices down. Rachel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She could feel the weight of eyes on her back. She could hear the whisper of fabric as people shifted in their seats. She could feel judgment pressing in, quiet and heavy. Ethan crossed his arms, satisfied. Look, I fly this route all the time. I'm a priority customer. He said the word slowly, as if explaining something obvious to a child. The system messes up. Happens. Karen nodded once. Too quickly. Of course. Daniel noticed everything. The nod. The word priority. The way Karen did not once look directly at him now. He noticed the subtle way authority slid away from truth and toward convenience. This seat was paid for, Daniel said. Still calm, still even, in full. Karen's smile flickered. I'm sure it was, sir. But nothing, Rachel said quietly. Karen turned to her, irritation flashing across her face before she smoothed it away. Ma'am, please. Rachel straightened in her seat. Her voice was controlled, but there was steel underneath it now. You're talking about my husband. A few rows back, an older man lowered his newspaper. His eyes moved from Daniel to Ethan, then to Karen. He had seen this before. Different faces, same rhythm. Karen inhaled. She could feel the cabin watching her now. This needed to end. Quickly. She leaned in toward Daniel, lowering her voice, the way people do when they think it makes their words less sharp. Sir, we have an overbooking situation. I'm going to need you to step aside while we fix it. Daniel looked at her fully now. For the first time, Karen felt something shift. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't pleading. They were assessing. Measuring. No, Daniel said. The word landed flat and heavy. Karen blinked. Ethan laughed again, louder this time. You serious? Daniel didn't look at him. This seat is assigned to me. Karen's jaw tightened. She felt heat rise up her neck. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Sir, if you refuse to cooperate, we may have to reassign you. Reassign me where? Rachel asked. Karen hesitated for half a beat. Just long enough. Rachel saw it. Daniel saw it. Economy, Karen said. We'll offer compensation. Ethan smirked. There you go. Problem solved. The word economy hung in the air like a verdict. Daniel leaned back slightly in his seat. He felt Rachel's hand tremble in his. He felt the eyes. He felt the old, familiar weight of being underestimated, misplaced, categorized. He also felt something else. A cold, steady certainty. Inside his jacket pocket, his phone vibrated once. A notification he didn't check. He already knew what it would say. He had sent the message minutes earlier, when Karen's eyes first slid past him. He looked up at Karen. "I'm not moving." The cabin went silent again. Karen's smile vanished. "Sir, I'm asking you politely." Daniel nodded once. "And I'm answering you." Ethan leaned closer, his voice dropping into a sneer, meant only for Daniel. "You're about to make this real hard on yourself." Daniel finally turned to him. He studied Ethan's face. The entitlement, the certainty, the complete lack of awareness. "You already did," Daniel said. No one understood what he meant. Not yet. But somewhere beyond the jet bridge, beyond the glass walls of the terminal, phones were ringing, systems were flagging. Names were being pulled up by people who did not smile. And in a few minutes, everyone in that cabin was going to realize they had made a mistake that could not be undone. Karen Miller felt the room turning against her, and she hated that feeling more than anything. She straightened her shoulders the way she did when turbulence hit or a passenger cried too loudly in business class. Control was her language. Order was her shield. "Sir," she said, louder now, projecting authority the way she had been trained, "I'm going to ask you one final time to cooperate so we can depart on schedule." Around them, the cabin hummed with tension. Seatbelts lay unfastened. Overhead bins stood open like paused mouths. A man across the aisle pretended to read his tablet, the screen dark. 2 rows back, a woman angled her phone just enough to catch everything without looking obvious. Daniel Brooks watched it all unfold, as if from a distance. He registered Karen's clipped tone, the strain creeping into it. He registered Ethan's impatience, the subtle bounce of his knee, the way entitlement curdled into irritation when it met resistance. He registered Rachel's breathing, shallow now, controlled but tight, a familiar anger pressing behind her ribs. He also registered time. He glanced just briefly at his watch. The movement was small, but Ethan caught it. "What, you got somewhere else to be?" Ethan said, lips curling. "You're holding up a whole plane." Daniel looked back at him. "So are you." A few passengers sucked in their breath. Karen's eyes snapped between them. This was spiraling. "Enough," she said sharply. "Sir, if you refuse crew instructions, I will escalate this." "Escalate to whom?" Daniel asked. Karen hesitated, just long enough to expose uncertainty. "To security." Rachel's fingers tightened around Daniel's again. She leaned toward him, voice low. "Daniel." He squeezed her hand once. Steady, reassuring. Karen took the hesitation as defiance. Her jaw set. She reached for the intercom handset near the galley entrance, fingers moving with practiced certainty. "Captain, we have a situation in first class." Ethan smiled. He leaned back against the seat divider, arms crossed, already victorious in his mind. He loved this part. The part where systems bent, where people like Daniel learned their place. The captain's voice crackled through the cabin speakers, distorted slightly by static. "What seems to be the issue?" "We have a passenger refusing reassignment," Karen said. She didn't look at Daniel when she said it. It's delaying boarding. There was a pause. A long one. Stand by, the captain replied. Karen hung up, exhaling through her nose. Sir, you're making this much harder than it needs to be. Daniel didn't answer. Rachel felt something shift then, not just in the cabin, but in herself. She looked at Karen fully, really looked at her. The tight bun, the controlled smile that had vanished now, the eyes that refused to see them as anything but an obstacle. You didn't even check our boarding passes, Rachel said. Karen's eyes flicked to her. Ma'am, please. That's not an answer, Rachel said. Her voice was calm, but it carried. You decided we were expendable before you spoke to us. Ethan rolled his eyes. Here we go. A man 2 rows back cleared his throat. She's not wrong, he muttered, not quietly enough. Karen shot him a look. Sir, stay out of this. The man held up his hands, but he didn't look away. Karen felt heat crawling up her neck. She was losing the room. She could feel it. This wasn't supposed to happen. People were supposed to comply. Apologize. Move. Daniel leaned forward slightly. He lowered his voice, but it cut through the air. You made a decision without facts. Karen bristled. I followed protocol. Daniel said. You followed convenience. Silence dropped again, thick and uncomfortable. Ethan pushed off the divider and stepped closer, invading Daniel's space deliberately. Listen, man. Take the voucher. Take the seat in the back. You don't want this to get ugly. Daniel stood. He rose slowly, unfolding to his full height, controlled, deliberate. He didn't loom. He didn't rush. He simply occupied space. At 6'2", broad-shouldered, calm, he suddenly felt very present. Karen took an involuntary step back. Daniel looked down at Ethan, expression unreadable. You're already ugly. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Ethan's face flushed red. Excuse me. You heard me. Karen snapped. Sir, sit down. Now. Daniel did not. He turned slightly, just enough to include the cabin in his line of sight. He spoke clearly. I have complied with every rule. I paid for this seat. I boarded when instructed. I have not raised my voice. I have not insulted anyone. He looked back at Karen. You, however, decided that my presence here was negotiable. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Her chest rose and fell faster now. She reached again for the intercom. Captain, we need immediate assistance. Before she could lift it, Daniel spoke again. Before you do that, he said, I want you to understand something. Karen froze, handset hovering inches from its cradle. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket slowly, deliberately. Several passengers stiffened. Karen's eyes flicked to his hand. Sir, she said sharply, hands visible. Daniel stopped. He raised his empty hand slightly. I'm not reaching for anything dangerous. Then don't reach, Karen snapped. Daniel nodded. Fair. He withdrew his hand and let it fall back to his side. He looked at Karen with something close to pity. You've already crossed the line." Ethan laughed nervously. "You hear this guy?" Daniel didn't look at him. "I'm giving you a chance to step back." Karen swallowed. "This is not your call." Daniel's phone vibrated again in his pocket. This time, Rachel felt it too. She looked at him. He met her eyes and, for the first time since this started, allowed a small smile to touch the corner of his mouth. Not amused, assured. "What are you smiling at?" Ethan demanded. Daniel turned to him. "The clock." Karen finally grabbed the intercom. "Captain, we need security." The response came faster this time, urgent, clipped. "Do not escalate. I repeat, do not escalate. Remain where you are." Karen stared at the handset. "Captain?" "Stand by," the voice said again. "Remain where you are." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Ethan frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Daniel sat back down slowly. Calm returned to his posture, like water settling after a stone. He looked around the cabin, taking in the faces now openly watching. Curious, uneasy, some sympathetic, some still skeptical. Rachel exhaled, shaky. "Daniel." "We're okay," he said quietly. Karen felt something cold slide down her spine. The captain never said, "Do not escalate." Not like that. Her tablet chimed softly. She glanced down without thinking. Her screen flashed, then refreshed. A red banner appeared across the top. Operational hold. Do not depart. Karen's breath caught. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled. Another alert popped up beneath it. Ownership update pending. Executive review initiated. Her mouth went dry. "Karen?" Ethan said. "What's going on?" She didn't answer. The cabin speakers crackled again. This time, the captain's voice was different. Tighter. Controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "please remain seated. We have received a directive from operations." Boarding is paused. Ethan's confidence wavered. Paused? For what? Daniel leaned back, eyes forward, voice low but clear. For accountability. Karen looked at him then, really looked. The calm, the certainty, the complete lack of fear. Her mind raced, trying to catch up, to rationalize, to explain away the tightening knot in her stomach. She thought of the alerts, the wording, ownership update. Her gaze drifted to Daniel's face again, and for the first time, a thought crept in that made her blood run cold. Who exactly had she just tried to remove from this plane? Outside the aircraft, beyond the jet bridge, phones were ringing faster now. Calls being answered by people who did not ask questions. Names being spoken with sudden respect. Screens lighting up in rooms far from this cabin. Inside, the air grew heavier by the second. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. The reveal was coming, and there was no stopping it now. The cockpit door clicked open with a sound that was sharper than it should have been, metal on metal cutting through the murmur of the cabin. Captain Michael Turner stepped out, cap tucked under his arm, his face set in a way that told everyone this was no routine delay. He paused just long enough to take in the first-class cabin, The frozen bodies, the half-open mouths, the quiet panic hiding behind practiced smiles. Karen saw him first and straightened immediately. Relief flickered across her face, then vanished when she saw his expression. This wasn't the look of a man coming to smooth things over. This was the look of a man walking into a storm he didn't choose. "Captain," Karen said too quickly. "We have a passenger refusing, Karen," Turner cut in, his voice low but absolute. He didn't look at her. His eyes were already moving, scanning seat numbers, scanning faces, matching them against something only he could see. "I need you to stop talking." The words landed like a slap. Karen's mouth closed, her hands clenched at her sides. Ethan laughed once, short and sharp, trying to reclaim ground. "Captain, finally. This guy's been holding up the whole plane. I need that seat." Turner still didn't look at him. He took one step forward, then another, moving past the glossy wood divider, past the champagne flutes that now felt obscene. Each step was measured, intentional. The cabin seemed to shrink around him, as if the walls themselves were listening. Daniel watched him approach without moving. He had seen this walk before, in boardrooms and courtrooms, in places where decisions didn't get reversed once spoken. He knew the weight of it. He also knew Turner didn't yet know him. Not fully. Rachel's heart hammered. She could feel it in her throat now, loud and insistent. She watched the captain's eyes flicker to the empty seat beside Daniel, the one Ethan had claimed with his bag. She watched his jaw tighten. Turner stopped in the aisle, directly across from Daniel. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence stretched, the kind of silence that demands honesty. Turner broke it. "Sir," he said, and there was something different in the way he said it. Not courtesy. Recognition, half-formed. "May I see your boarding pass?" Daniel handed it over without a word. Turner took it, his fingers steady, his eyes dropping to the name. He read it once, then again. He swallowed. His thumb hovered over the paper as if it might burn him. Karen saw the change instantly. The slight pause, the way Turner's shoulders stiffened, then lowered, the way his breath shifted. "Captain," she said. Turner didn't answer. He looked up at Daniel, then back at the boarding pass. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't dial. He simply checked the screen, then the secure message that had been sitting there, unread, because he hadn't been authorized to open it until moments ago. Ethan leaned forward. "Is there a problem?" Turner finally looked at him. The look was cold. Assessing. Final. "Yes," Turner said. "There is." Ethan blinked. "Great. So you're going to fix it." Turner handed the boarding pass back to Daniel with both hands. The gesture was subtle, deliberate, respectful in a way that made Karen's stomach drop. "Sir," Turner said, and his voice was different now. Lower, controlled. "I need you to remain seated for the moment." Daniel nodded once. "Of course." Rachel exhaled, shaky. She felt it then, the shift. Not victory. Not yet. But gravity. Turner turned to Karen. "Karen, step aside." Karen obeyed without thinking. Her mind raced, grasping for explanations that no longer fit. She had done this 100 times. Hundreds. This had never happened. "Captain," she said, her voice tight. This passenger was reassigned due to... "Karen," Turner said again, sharper now. "You are done." The words hit her harder than anything else had. She felt heat flood her face. She glanced around the cabin, aware now of every watching eye, every phone no longer pretending not to record. Ethan scoffed. "This is ridiculous." Turner ignored him and addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing an operational delay. Please remain seated." "Operational delay," Ethan snapped. "Because of him." Turner turned fully toward Ethan. He stood close now, close enough that Ethan had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. "Because of you," Turner said. The cabin gasped as one. Ethan's smile faltered. "Excuse me. You are currently occupying a seat that is not assigned to you," Turner said. "You were granted access through improper escalation and interference with ground staff." Karen felt her knees weaken. Improper escalation. The words echoed in her head like an alarm. Ethan laughed again, but this time it cracked. "You can't be serious." "I am," Turner said. "I'm also informing you that this aircraft is under a temporary hold issued by Operations." "Operations doesn't outrank me," Ethan shot back. "My family." "Your family," Turner interrupted, "is irrelevant." Ethan's face flushed. "Do you know who I am?" Turner's eyes didn't waver. "I know exactly who you are." He gestured toward the empty aisle. "Collect your belongings." Ethan stared at him, disbelief sliding into panic. "You're not kicking me off this plane." "I haven't finished," Turner said. He turned back toward Daniel. The cabin held its breath. "Sir," Turner said, his voice lowering again, carrying an edge of something that felt uncomfortably like apology. "I have received a directive from Federal Aviation Operations and Corporate Governance." Karen's breath caught. Turner continued, each word deliberate. "This aircraft is not cleared for departure. The directive cites a code red personnel incident." Murmurs erupted. Rachel felt her hands tremble now, not from fear, but from the magnitude of it. Code red wasn't used lightly. She knew that much. Ethan's voice rose. "Code red? For what?" "This is insane." Turner turned back to him. "For unauthorized displacement of corporate leadership." The words dropped into the cabin like a dropped tray, loud and final. Karen felt the blood drain from her face. Corporate leadership. Her mind raced backward through every decision she had made in the last hour. Every assumption. Every look she hadn't given Daniel. Every time she had chosen speed over fairness. Ethan froze. "What did you just say?" Turner didn't answer him immediately. He stepped slightly to the side, clearing the aisle. He gestured toward Daniel. "Sir," Turner said, and now his voice carried, filling the cabin, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "May I confirm your identity for the record?" Daniel looked around the cabin. He saw the faces, the disbelief, the dawning understanding. He saw Karen's terror, Ethan's confusion, tipping into fear. He took a breath. "Yes," Daniel said. "You may." Turner nodded once, as if bracing himself. "Are you Daniel Brooks?" A sound rippled through the cabin, not quite a gasp, not quite a whisper. A collective intake of breath. Daniel met Turner's eyes. "I am." "And Rachel Brooks?" Turner asked, nodding toward her. "Yes," Rachel said softly. Turner straightened fully. He removed his cap and held it against his chest. The gesture was unmistakable, formal, deeply respectful. "On behalf of the flight deck," Turner said, his voice steady but tight, "I acknowledge the presence of the owner of this airline." The cabin exploded. Gasps, voices, phones lifted openly now. Someone swore under their breath. Someone else laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. Ethan staggered back a step. "That's not funny," he said weakly. "This is some kind of joke." Daniel stood, slowly, calmly. "No," he said. "This is accountability." Turner turned to Ethan, his face hard as steel. "Mr. Caldwell, you would authorized to be on this aircraft." Ethan shook his head, backing away. "You can't do this." Turner reached for his radio. "Security, this is the captain. We have a non-compliant passenger in first class. Code Gray. Immediate assistance." Karen closed her eyes. She understood now, and there was nothing left to say. Ethan Caldwell backed into the bulkhead, as if the plane itself had betrayed him, his hand slapping uselessly against the polished wood divider. "This is insane," he said, voice rising, cracking at the edges. "You don't just pull someone off a plane because they ask for a seat." Captain Turner didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You didn't ask," he said. "You coerced." Karen stood frozen near the galley, arms hanging stiff at her sides, eyes fixed on the floor, as if looking up might collapse what little ground she had left. Her tablet buzzed again. She didn't touch it. She already knew what it would say. Daniel watched Ethan's panic bloom with clinical clarity. He saw the moment entitlement curdled into fear, when the rules Ethan thought he owned snapped back into place. He felt no satisfaction, only resolve. "Sir," Turner said into the radio, confirming Code Gray in first class. "Passenger is belligerent and refusing crew instructions." Static answered, then a calm voice. "Copy, Captain. Officers are en route." The word officers sliced through the cabin. Ethan lunged forward, pointing at Daniel. "This is your fault. You set this up." Daniel didn't flinch. "You set it up when you decided rules were optional." Rachel stood now too, moving beside Daniel, her posture straight, her voice steady when she spoke. "You treated us like obstacles, like furniture you could move." Ethan laughed, sharp and desperate. "You don't get to lecture me." Karen finally looked up. Her eyes met Rachel's for a split second, and Rachel saw it then. Fear, regret, a dawning understanding that this moment would not be contained. "Captain," Karen said quietly. "I was following procedure." Turner didn't look at her. Procedure doesn't override integrity. The aisle filled with movement as two uniformed airport police officers boarded, shoulders broad, expressions neutral. The lead officer scanned the scene quickly, professionally. "Captain." "Officer," Turner said. "Passenger in seat 1A is refusing to comply." Ethan sputtered. "I'm not the problem here." "He is." He jabbed a finger at Daniel again. "He threatened me." The officer's gaze shifted to Daniel. Calm. Still. Hands visible. No aggression. No chaos. Then back to Ethan, flushed, sweating, hands shaking. "Sir," the officer said to Ethan, "I need you to step into the aisle." Ethan shook his head. "I paid for this seat." Daniel spoke, voice even. "You paid for influence, not ownership." The officer's jaw tightened slightly. "Sir, this is not a negotiation." Ethan grabbed the armrest, fingers digging into the leather. "You can't touch me." The second officer moved in, blocking the aisle behind him. "We can," he said, "and we will." The cabin had gone deathly quiet. Every eye was locked on the scene. Phones were up now, openly recording. A woman near the window whispered, "Oh my God." A man across the aisle murmured. He did this to himself. Rachel felt a surge of something unexpected. Not triumph. Release. Years of swallowing moments like this, finally loosening their grip. "Sir," the lead officer said, firmer now. "Stand up." Ethan's breathing went ragged. "My father knows people," he blurted. "Important people." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "So do I." The officer pried Ethan's fingers from the armrest one by one. The leather creaked. Ethan shouted, words tumbling out, threats and protests colliding in the air. "This is discrimination. You're humiliating me." Daniel watched him pass, escorted into the aisle, shoulders hunched now, bravado stripped away. As Ethan was pulled past, he leaned toward Daniel, face inches away, eyes wild. "You'll regret this." Daniel met his gaze, voice low and unshakable. "You already do." The officers turned him toward the front, guiding him toward the open aircraft door. Applause broke out then, hesitant at first, then swelling, rolling through the cabin like a wave. Some clapped slowly, others cheered. Not for spectacle, for justice. Karen felt her knees give. She grabbed the edge of the galley counter, breathing shallow. The sound of clapping felt like judgment landing on her shoulders. She had wanted this resolved quietly, efficiently. She had chosen the wrong shortcut. Turner waited until the officers disappeared down the jet bridge with Ethan before turning back to the cabin. He raised a hand. The applause died down. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for your patience." Daniel exhaled, long and steady. Rachel leaned into him briefly, her forehead touching his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her without looking, grounding them both. Turner turned to Daniel, posture formal again. "Sir, I owe you an apology." Daniel studied him. He saw a man balancing authority and responsibility. A man who had just realized the system he served could fail spectacularly. "I accept it," Daniel said. "But apologies don't fix systems." Turner nodded. No, they don't. Karen took a tentative step forward. Her voice shook. Mr. Brooks. Daniel turned to her. She swallowed. I made assumptions. Yes, Daniel said. I didn't know, she said weakly. Daniel's eyes hardened. That's the point. Her face crumpled. She opened her mouth to say more, then closed it. There was nothing left that wouldn't sound like excuse. Turner checked his watch. We are officially grounded, he said. Operations has issued a hold pending review. A murmur spread. Grounded? Someone asked. Someone. What does that mean? Daniel stepped slightly forward, just enough to be seen. The cabin quieted instinctively. He hadn't raised his voice once, and yet the room bent toward him. It means, Daniel said, this flight isn't going anywhere. A ripple of confusion moved through the rows. Turner looked at him, surprised. Sir? Daniel turned to Rachel, then back to the cabin. I can't allow a plane to fly when its ground processes are compromised. Karen's breath caught. You're cancelling the flight? Yes, Daniel said. Effective immediately. Gasps, protests. Then silence as he continued. Every passenger on this aircraft will receive a full refund, he said, plus compensation for your time. My team will arrange alternate travel with partner airlines today. A man near the aisle laughed in disbelief. You're serious? I am, Daniel said. Turner straightened. Understood. Karen felt the world tilt. Cancelling a flight was unthinkable. Cancelling it from inside the cabin? She felt the weight of consequences slam into her chest. Captain, Daniel said, turning to Turner. Please deplane the passengers. Turner nodded once. Yes, sir. As people stood and gathered their belongings, the mood was electric. Not angry, energized. Conversations buzzed. Phones chimed with notifications as news spread faster than the jet fuel smell in the cabin. Karen watched Daniel and Rachel walk slowly toward the door, flanked now by Turner. She felt invisible, exposed. Every decision she had made replayed in her mind, each one heavier than the last. At the aircraft door, Daniel paused. He looked back at the cabin one final time. This didn't have to happen, he said. But it did. And now it will change. No one argued. Outside, beyond the jet bridge, corporate teams were assembling. Auditors, lawyers, executives moving with purpose. The machinery of accountability had begun to turn. Karen stepped off the plane last, head down, heart pounding. She didn't know what would happen next. Only that her life, as she knew it, had ended in that cabin. Daniel and Rachel walked into the terminal lights, hand in hand, the noise swelling around them. The reveal was complete. The reckoning had only just begun. The terminal at JFK exploded into noise the moment the jet bridge doors opened. A flood of voices colliding with rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, and the sharp echo of heels on polished stone. What had been contained inside the aircraft now spilled into public space, and with it came confusion, speculation, and the first sparks of something much larger. Karen Miller stood frozen at the base of the jet bridge, watching passengers stream past her. They didn't look angry. They looked alert, charged. People checked their phones, murmured to each other, eyes wide as notifications stacked faster than they could read. She caught fragments of sentences as they passed. Owner. Did you hear that? That guy in the hoodie. Each word landed like a blow. She tried to breathe. Her chest wouldn't cooperate. Daniel Brooks stepped into the terminal with Rachel at his side, Captain Turner just behind them. He moved calmly, but the world around him bent in subtle ways. Conversations dropped as he passed. People slowed, staring openly now. A few nodded. One woman touched his arm lightly as she passed. "Thank you," she said, voice thick. He met her eyes and nodded once. Rachel felt the weight of it more than he did. The stares, the sudden recognition, the way strangers leaned in as if proximity itself mattered. She stayed close to Daniel, her hand anchored in his sleeve, steadying herself as much as him. A man in a dark suit intercepted them near the edge of the terminal. He was tall, mid-50s, silver at the temples, expression tight with urgency. "Daniel," he said quietly. "We're set." Daniel nodded. Gavin. Gavin Ross, Chief Operating Officer of Brooks Capital Group, didn't waste words. He never had. FAA compliance teams are on standby. Corporate audit is mobilized. Internal systems are frozen. Daniel glanced once toward the check-in counters. Good. Karen followed their gaze without realizing it. The Ascend Airways logo glowed above her workstation, bright and familiar, a symbol she had worn like armor for years. She felt suddenly very small beneath it. Gavin continued, voice low. "Security footage from the gate is already being pulled. Loyalty point transfers flagged. Manual overrides logged." Karen's stomach dropped. Daniel turned slightly, his voice calm but lethal. "Make sure nothing disappears." "It won't," Gavin said. "We locked it the moment your message came through." Karen's tablet chimed in her hand. She looked down. Red text flashed across the screen. "Access restricted. Account under review." Her badge reader beeped once. Then again. Red. She stared at it, disbelief tightening her throat. "Karen Miller," a voice said behind her. She turned slowly. Gavin stood a few feet away now, tablet in hand, eyes unreadable. Two men in navy suits flanked him, silent, alert. Auditors. Cleaners, Daniel called them. "Yes," she said faintly. Gavin glanced at the tablet. "You manually overrode a confirmed first-class booking at 12:47 in the afternoon." Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "You reassigned 2 fully paid seats to a non-ticketed passenger," Gavin continued, "in exchange for loyalty points transferred to your personal account." "I was prioritizing," she started. "You were bribed," Gavin said. The word hit harder than any accusation she'd ever faced. Daniel stepped closer, his presence quiet but overwhelming. "You judged us by our appearance," he said. "You assumed power lived in a suit." Karen's vision blurred. I didn't know. Daniel's voice didn't rise. That is exactly why this matters. Around them, the terminal buzzed with activity. Screens flickered. The Ascend Airways logo vanished from one display, replaced by a stark message. Operations suspended. Under new management. A collective murmur rolled through the crowd. Karen looked up, panic surging. "You can't do this. I have a union." "I have had," Gavin corrected. "Your badge is deactivated." Karen looked down at the plastic rectangle clipped to her blazer. For years, it had opened doors. Now it was just weight. Rachel stepped forward, her voice steady but edged with something fierce. "You humiliated my husband." Karen looked at her then, really looked, and saw not anger, but resolve, the kind that didn't need to shout. Daniel turned back to Gavin. "Shut down all Ascend flights out of JFK today." Gavin nodded. "Already in progress." A man nearby cursed loudly as another departure board updated, flights blinking from on time to cancelled. Phones rang. Agents scrambled. The terminal tipped into controlled chaos. Karen sagged against the counter, legs giving way. She slid down slowly, unnoticed by most, invisible now in a way she had never been before. Daniel watched the ripple spread. This wasn't vengeance. It was correction. His phone buzzed. He checked it briefly. A message from legal, from compliance, from communications. The story was all already moving faster than they could contain it. A teenager stood near the gate, phone held high, filming everything. His whisper carried just enough. "That's him. That's the guy." Rachel noticed him and smiled faintly. "He's recording." Daniel nodded. "Let him." Minutes later, they were ushered into a private corridor, away from the growing crowd. Captain Turner stopped at the threshold. "Sir," he said, "I'd be honored to fly you wherever you need to go." Daniel considered him. "I'll hold you to that." Turner smiled, relief and pride flickering across his face. As Daniel and Rachel walked on, Karen remained on the floor by the counter, staring at the blank screen in front of her. Her reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, stripped of authority. She could hear it now, the whisper spreading through the terminal. Her name, her actions, her fall. Somewhere down the concourse, Ethan Caldwell sat handcuffed on a bench, shouting into a phone that no one was answering. He didn't see the auditors pass him. He didn't see the screens change. He was still arguing with a world that had already moved on. Daniel and Rachel stepped into the afternoon light, the glass doors sliding shut behind them. Outside, black sedans waited, engines idling, doors opening in quiet unison. Rachel exhaled deeply for the first time since boarding. "Are you okay?" Daniel took her hand, squeezing gently. "I am now." Behind them, an airline collapsed. Ahead of them, something cleaner would rise. And for everyone who had watched it happen, nothing would ever look quite the same again. The black sedan pulled away from the curb in silence, tires whispering over concrete as JFK receded behind tinted glass. Inside the car, the world finally slowed. The chaos, the voices, The flashing screens all fell away, replaced by the steady hum of the engine and the muted rhythm of Daniel Brooks' breathing. Rachel leaned back against the leather seat, eyes closed, hands folded tightly in her lap. Only now did the tremor start. It ran through her fingers first, then her shoulders, a delayed release after holding herself together for too long. Daniel noticed immediately. He reached across the narrow space and covered her hands with his. Warm, solid, anchoring. "It's over," he said quietly. Rachel opened her eyes. They were wet but focused. "No," she said. "It's just finally visible." Daniel didn't argue. He understood what she meant. In the front seat, Gavin Ross spoke into his phone in a low, efficient cadence. "Yes, all domestic departures frozen. Yes, effective immediately. No exceptions." He paused, listening. "I don't care who's calling. They can wait." He ended the call and turned slightly. "News is already breaking." Daniel nodded. "Good." Gavin studied him in the rear-view mirror. He had worked with Daniel for over 15 years. He had seen him in hostile takeovers, boardroom ambushes, quiet negotiations that ended entire careers. But he had never seen him like this. Not publicly. Not exposed to raw human judgment. "You okay?" Gavin asked. Daniel's answer was immediate. "I'm clear." The sedan merged onto the expressway. Outside, planes roared overhead, lifting off from runways that, for the moment, no longer belonged to Ascend Airways. Daniel watched one cut across the sky, silver against grey, and thought of how close that aircraft had come to carrying a broken system into the air. Rachel followed his gaze. "People are going to talk." "They already are," Daniel said. As if on cue, his phone buzzed again. He didn't look at it this time. He already knew the shape of the noise that was coming. Outrage, applause, denial, spin. It always followed the same pattern. What mattered was what came next. The sedan turned into a secured hangar entrance and rolled to a stop. The door opened and cool air rushed in, heavy with the scent of fuel and metal. Ahead of them stood a Gulfstream jet, sleek and waiting, its nose pointed outward like an arrow finally released. Captain Turner stood at the base of the stairs, posture straight, eyes sharp but warm. He nodded once when he saw them. "Sir." "Ma'am." Rachel smiled faintly. "Captain." Turner hesitated, then spoke with careful sincerity. "I've flown for over 30 years. I've seen power in a lot of forms. Today reminded me what responsibility looks like." Daniel met his gaze. Then today did its job. They climbed the stairs together, the jet swallowing them into quiet luxury. The door sealed behind them with a soft, final sound. Inside, the cabin felt different from the commercial aircraft. Not louder, not flashier, just calmer, purpose-built. Rachel sank into a seat by the window, staring out at the tarmac where ground crews moved like ants around machines far larger than themselves. Daniel sat across from her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. He finally allowed himself a breath that went all the way to the bottom of his lungs. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then Rachel broke the silence. "Do you remember Chicago?" Daniel smiled. A real one. This time. "The basement apartment? The one with the radiator that screamed all night," she said. "And the ceiling that leaked every time it rained." "And the ramen dinners," he added. Rachel laughed softly. "We used to talk about power like it was this abstract thing. Money, titles, offices with views." Daniel nodded. "We were wrong." Rachel turned to him. "Power is deciding whether a plane full of people takes off." He held her gaze. "Power is deciding whether it should." The jet's engines spooled up slowly, a controlled rising hum. Outside, the world blurred. As they lifted into the air, Daniel's phone vibrated again. This time, he answered. "Daniel," came the voice on the other end, tight and furious. "You've grounded an entire airline." Daniel looked out the window as the runway fell away beneath them. "I grounded a risk." "You're going to face backlash," the voice warned. "Lawsuits, pressure, media storms." Daniel's tone was calm, almost gentle. "I'm already facing them." There was a pause. "You made this public." Daniel smiled faintly. "No." They did. He ended the call and set the phone aside. Below them, New York stretched out, dense and indifferent, a city that swallowed stories whole and moved on. But this one wouldn't be swallowed so easily. Rachel's phone chimed. She glanced at it, then looked back at Daniel, eyes wide. "It's everywhere." He didn't ask where. He knew. Somewhere back at the terminal, Karen Miller sat in a small office she had never noticed before, answering questions from people who didn't care how long she had worked there or how many passengers she had processed. Somewhere else, Ethan Caldwell stared at his reflection in a holding cell window, trying to understand how a man in a hoodie had erased his certainty in less than an hour. And across the country, people watched the footage again and again. The snap of fingers, the refusal to move, the calm voice saying no. Daniel leaned back in his seat as the jet leveled off. For the first time that day, the tension in his shoulders eased. Rachel reached across the small table between them and took his hand. "You didn't do this because you were angry." "No," Daniel said. "You did it because you were responsible." He squeezed her fingers. Someone had to be. The jet cut through the clouds, sunlight breaking through in sudden brilliance. For a moment, everything below disappeared, and all that remained was sky. Daniel closed his eyes, not in exhaustion, but in resolve. The system had been exposed. Now it would be rebuilt. Not loudly, not for applause, but correctly. And somewhere far below, the consequences of a single snap of fingers continued to unfold, irreversible and necessary. The holding room smelled like disinfectant and old coffee, the kind of place designed to erase individuality. Ethan Caldwell paced the narrow strip of floor between the metal bench and the wall, his footsteps sharp, frantic. His phone was finally back in his hand, but it might as well have been dead weight. Every call went unanswered. Every text sat unread. The confidence that had carried him through the morning was gone, replaced by a rising, choking panic he didn't know how to manage. "This is a mistake," he muttered for the 10th time. "This is a mistake." The officer by the door didn't look up. Ethan stopped pacing and stared at his reflection in the scratched glass. His hair was out of place. His tie hung loose, crooked. For the first time in his adult life, he looked like a man without leverage. He raised the phone again and finally got through. "Dad," he said, the word coming out sharper than he meant it to. "You need to fix this." There was a pause on the other end. Not the pause of surprise, the pause of calculation. "Where are you?" his father asked. "At the airport. JFK. They dragged me off a plane like a criminal." Another pause. Longer this time. "They said the owner was on board," Ethan continued, talking faster now. "Some guy named Daniel Brooks. It's a stunt. You know how these people are." The silence on the line stretched until Ethan's chest tightened. "Ethan," his father said finally, and the sound of his voice made Ethan's stomach drop. "Daniel Brooks is not a stunt." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the bank," his father said. "The one that just called in every outstanding loan we have." Ethan felt the floor tilt. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," his father said, and now there was something else in his voice. Fear. Brooks Capital acquired controlling interest last quarter. Quietly. We didn't see it coming. Ethan swallowed. "So what does that mean?" "It means," his father said, each word heavier than the last, "that you picked the wrong man to humiliate." The call ended. Ethan stared at the phone, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. Around him, the holding room remained unchanged. Sterile, indifferent. The world had not shifted for him. He had simply fallen out of it. Across the city, Karen Miller sat under fluorescent lights in a windowless office, her hands wrapped around a paper cup she hadn't touched. A compliance officer spoke in measured tones across the table, sliding documents forward one by one. Screenshots. Logbooks. Timestamps. "You authorized a manual override," the officer said, "without cause." Karen nodded numbly. "You accepted compensation." "I didn't think." "That is not relevant," the officer said. Karen stared at the table. She could hear the airport outside the thin walls. Announcements, rolling luggage, life continuing. She felt like she had been sealed off from it. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. When she finally looked, her breath caught. Her name was everywhere. Headlines stacked one after another. Videos clipped, slowed, analyzed, her face frozen mid-sentence, her voice dissected. Words she barely remembered saying played back with merciless clarity. "We have an overbooking situation. Please cooperate. Economy." She dropped the phone, hands shaking. Outside that office, the story accelerated. By the time Daniel's jet crossed into cruising altitude, the footage had already reached millions. The snap of fingers, the refusal to move, the captain removing his hat. Commentators argued, lawyers speculated, former passengers told their own stories. Decades of quiet humiliation finally given a language. In a studio uptown, a producer waved frantically through glass. "We need an angle," she said. "Now." "It's about power," the host replied. "It always is." In living rooms and kitchens across the country, older couples leaned closer to their televisions. They recognized the tone, the posture, the way authority had been used like a blunt instrument. They had lived long enough to know this wasn't new. It was just finally visible. On the jet, Rachel watched the city fade beneath cloud cover. Her phone rested face down on the table. She didn't need to look. She could feel the momentum. "Are you ready for what comes next?" she asked softly. Daniel considered the question. He thought of the calls that would come, the meetings, the resistance disguised as concern. He thought of the systems he would have to tear down piece by piece, not with fury, but with precision. "Yes," he said, "because this isn't about them." Rachel nodded. It never was. Gavin Ross's voice came through the cabin intercom. "Daniel, we're getting pressure from the board." Daniel didn't look up. "Let them apply it. They're worried about optics." Daniel smiled faintly. "Optics are what got us here." Back at JFK, the Ascend Airways terminal had transformed into a hive of activity. Screens flickered between messages. Staff clustered in small groups, whispering. Supervisors moved quickly, avoiding eye contact. A few agents quietly logged out and packed their bags, already sensing the shift in power. An older gate agent watched it all from a distance. She had worked there for 30 years. She had seen favoritism, bribes disguised as tips, rules bent until they broke. She felt no sympathy now, only a strange relief. "About time," she muttered. In the compliance office, Karen signed the final document with a hand that barely felt like her own. The officer collected it without comment. "You are terminated effective immediately," he said. "Further contact will be through legal counsel." Karen stood on unsteady legs. "What happens now?" The officer met her eyes, not unkindly. "Now you live with it." She walked out into the terminal. No badge, no authority. Just another face in a crowd that no longer recognized her. She felt smaller with every step. At the same moment, Ethan was released on his own recognizance, his name already radioactive. He stepped into the sunlight and shielded his eyes, squinting as cameras clicked from across the street. He turned away, head down, understanding for the first time what it meant to be seen without protection. High above, Daniel Brooks looked out at a sky that had finally cleared. The turbulence was behind them now. What lay ahead would not be easy. Systems never gave up power quietly, but they would give it up. Because the truth had been recorded, shared, understood. And once that happened, there was no snapping of fingers loud enough to make it disappear. The backlash arrived exactly 48 hours later, right on schedule, dressed in concern and wrapped in carefully chosen language. It always did. Daniel Brooks sat at the long walnut table in the temporary operations suite overlooking Manhattan, city lights blinking like a nervous system below. The room was quiet except for the low murmur of screens and the occasional scrape of a chair as someone shifted their weight. "Public sentiment is strong," a communications director said, tapping her tablet. "But it's volatile. We're seeing an effort to reframe the narrative." Daniel didn't look up. "Of course you are." On the screen at the far end of the room, a morning show played without sound. The chyron read, "Airline chaos sparks outrage." The host leaned forward, hands clasped, eyebrows lifted in practiced empathy. A familiar face appeared beside her. Karen Miller. She wore a conservative blouse and minimal makeup. Her hair was softer now, less severe. Her posture curved inward, shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing against the world. Daniel watched the way she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue before speaking. He had seen this performance before. He had watched it dismantle truth countless times. "I was just doing my job," Karen said, her voice trembling, amplified by studio microphones. "I was following procedures, and now my life is destroyed." The host nodded sympathetically. "You feel targeted?" "Yes," Karen said quickly. "This billionaire used his power to humiliate a working woman. I was afraid. I felt unsafe." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he remained still. Around the table, the mood shifted. Discomfort, anger, a familiar frustration with how quickly accountability could be reframed as cruelty when the balance of power shifted. "She's flipping it," Gavin Ross said quietly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Because it works." "On screen," Karen continued, "no one's talking about how aggressive he was, how he refused to move." "I was just trying to keep the flight on schedule." The host leaned in. "So you're saying this was class warfare?" Karen nodded emphatically. "Exactly." Daniel leaned back in his chair and exhaled through his nose. He reached for the remote and muted the screen entirely. "Do nothing," he said. The room stilled. The communications director frowned. "Sir?" "Do nothing," Daniel repeated. "Let it play." Gavin studied him. "They're painting you as the villain." Daniel met his eyes. "Only until the facts arrive." As if summoned by the words, Daniel's phone buzzed once on the table. A message from legal. Footage secured. Bank logs cleared. Authorization ready. He stood. "Unmute it," he said. The screen came back to life. Karen's voice wavered as she spoke about bills, about fear, about being judged. The host nodded, eyes shining with carefully calibrated compassion. A producer's voice cut in from off-screen. "Angela, we have a caller." The host looked surprised. "We do?" "Yes," the voice said. "Gavin Ross, Chief Operating Officer of Brooks Capital." Daniel folded his arms. "Put him through," the host said, sensing drama. Gavin's voice filled the studio, crisp and even. "Good morning." Karen's head snapped toward the sound, her face draining of color. "Mr. Ross," the host said, "we're discussing allegations of misuse of power." "I understand," Gavin said, "and we welcome scrutiny. That's why we've provided your producers with security footage from gate operations, internal system logs, and transaction records." Karen shot to her feet. "You can't show that." "It's corporate property," Gavin replied calmly. "And since you chose to discuss your conduct publicly, we're entitled to respond." The screen behind the host flickered, then split. Footage played. Karen at the gate, her voice sharp, dismissive, her eyes sliding past Daniel. her smile blooming for Ethan. Her hand hovering over the keyboard, manual override executed in real time. A timestamp flashed. 12:47. The audio followed. "We've had a lot of fraud lately," Karen's voice said. "I'll need to see the physical card." The studio audience murmured. Another clip. Karen whispering to Ethan, nodding as he transferred loyalty points. The transaction record appeared beside it. 2,000 points. Personal account. Karen's mouth opened. No sound came out. Gavin continued, unhurried. "Our audit also identified a pattern. Over 50 instances in the past year where Ms. Miller displaced paying passengers, disproportionately minorities, to accommodate non-ticketed individuals." The host's expression shifted. Sympathy evaporated, replaced by shock. Karen shook her head, backing away. "That's not—" "We are filing suit for damages," Gavin said, "and cooperating fully with federal review." The feed cut. The studio sat in stunned silence as the audience began to boo. Daniel turned away from the screen. "Now," he said, "we rebuild." In another part of the city, Ethan Caldwell watched the same broadcast from a rented apartment he could barely afford. The curtains were drawn. The room smelled of stale takeout and panic. His phone rang, finally. "Dad," he said. There was no anger on the other end now, only exhaustion. "It's done." Ethan swallowed. "What do you mean?" "The loans," his father said. "All called in. The house is gone. The accounts are frozen." Ethan's knees buckled. He sank onto the couch. "You did this," his father continued, not accusing, simply stating fact. "You mistook noise for power." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the wall, the echo of his own laughter from 2 days ago ringing in his ears. He thought of the snap of his fingers, the certainty, the way the man in the hoodie hadn't moved. Across the river, Daniel stood by the window of the operations suite as the city breathed below him. Rachel joined him, slipping her hand into his. "They tried," she said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "They always do." "And?" "They failed." Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. "What happens now?" Daniel watched the lights, the traffic, the millions of lives intersecting in systems built by choices like the one Karen had made. Now we set a standard. Behind them, the team moved with renewed focus. Policies drafted, training rewritten, loyalty programs dismantled, metrics rebuilt around dignity instead of deference. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. The storm had passed. What remained was the work. 6 months later, the terminal no longer felt like an airport. The space that had once been loud with stress and indifference now moved with a quieter confidence. The lighting was warmer. The lines flowed instead of tangled. The walls no longer screamed slogans about luxury or status. Instead, a single sentence was etched in brushed metal above every check-in counter. "Respect is the currency of boarding." Daniel Brooks stood just inside the entrance, hands in the pockets of a dark coat, watching people move. He wasn't announced. He wasn't escorted. He wanted to see what happened when no one knew he was there. An elderly couple approached the counter hesitantly, tickets folded too carefully in trembling hands. The new gate agent, a woman in her early 30s, smiled before they even spoke. "Good morning," she said. "Take your time." Daniel watched the couple's shoulders relax. That was the metric that mattered. Behind him, Rachel joined quietly, her gaze following his. "It's different," she said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Because fear is expensive. We removed it." The airline no longer had tiers that invited abuse. The loyalty program that once rewarded entitlement had been dismantled and replaced with a simple structure based on consistency, not intimidation. Training wasn't about compliance anymore. It was about judgment, about when to pause instead of escalate. Daniel had insisted on that word, judgment, because systems didn't fail randomly. They failed through people making small, unchecked decisions while believing no one important was watching. At the far end of the terminal, a young family struggled with an oversized stroller. A supervisor stepped in immediately, not with irritation, but with practiced ease. No sighs, no eye rolls, just help. Rachel smiled faintly. "They're not afraid anymore." Daniel nodded. "Neither are the passengers." Outside the terminal, the world had moved on, but not forgotten. Karen Miller hadn't vanished the way she once feared. Her fall had been slower, heavier, more ordinary. After the lawsuit settled and the fines were paid, she found work at a fulfillment warehouse in Queens. 10-hour shifts, concrete floors, quotas posted in red numbers above each station. She taped boxes now, hundreds of them. Her back ached constantly. Her hands were raw. One afternoon, she sealed a carton and froze. The logo stared back at her. Titanium audio. She looked around the warehouse. Pallets stacked high with titanium devices, headphones, tablets, smart watches. Everywhere she turned, his name followed her. Every package added a fraction of a cent to Daniel Brooks's balance sheet. She worked faster, not because anyone told her to, because stopping meant thinking. Ethan Caldwell's life unraveled more publicly. His sentence wasn't long. Community service, probation, a fine he couldn't comfortably afford. But the real punishment wasn't legal. It was social. He picked up trash along a highway now, wearing an orange vest that itched in the heat. Cars slowed sometimes. People pointed. A few recognized him. One afternoon, a convertible pulled alongside the shoulder. Laughter drifted out. A phone camera flashed. "Smile!" someone called. For the internet. Ethan lowered his head and kept working. At night, in the small apartment he shared with 2 roommates who barely tolerated him, he replayed that moment on the plane. The snap of his fingers. The certainty that the world would bend. It hadn't. Back in Manhattan, Daniel reviewed the quarterly report on a tablet as he sat in a quiet lounge overlooking the Hudson. Customer satisfaction was up 400%. Complaints were down. Employee turnover had dropped sharply. Rachel set 2 cups of tea on the table between them. "You did more than fix an airline," she said. Daniel looked up. "No." I removed permission. She smiled. "For people like her." "And him," Daniel added. Rachel studied him. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd just moved seats? Daniel considered the question. He thought of the countless moments in his life where moving would have been easier, quieter, safer. Yes, he said. And then I think about who else would have paid for that silence. Rachel reached across the table and took his hand. They won't anymore. That evening, Daniel boarded one of the airline's new flagship aircraft. There were no classes now in the old sense. Everyone had space. Everyone had dignity. The layout reflected it. No curtain. No hierarchy. A flight attendant greeted him with the same calm warmth she gave every passenger. "Welcome aboard." Daniel nodded and took his seat. As the plane lifted into the sky, he looked around the cabin. A young black couple laughed quietly over a shared screen. An older woman was helped gently with her blanket. A businessman stowed his bag without being rushed. This was the quiet aftermath no one filmed. This was the part that mattered. Daniel leaned back as the engines settled into their steady hum. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt resolved. The system had been exposed not by anger, but by refusal. Refusal to shrink. Refusal to comply with disrespect dressed as policy. Refusal to move when moving would have validated the lie. Outside the window, clouds rolled beneath the aircraft, endless and indifferent. Inside, something had finally aligned. And somewhere, someone in a uniform hesitated before snapping their fingers, unsure now if the person in front of them might own the ground they were standing on. The aircraft descended through a band of pale cloud, sunlight breaking across the wing in slow, deliberate flashes, the kind that made everything inside the cabin feel hushed and intentional. Daniel Brooks watched the ground rise to meet them, green fields giving way to runways and lights, and felt a calm satisfaction settle deep in his chest. Not pride, not relief, something steadier. Closure. The captain's voice came through the cabin, even and unhurried. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach. Thank you for flying with us." There was no applause, no spectacle, just quiet trust. Rachel reached for Daniel's hand as the landing gear deployed with a muted thud. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder, her voice barely above a breath. "This is how it should feel." Daniel nodded. "Invisible when it's done right." The plane touched down smoothly, rolling along the runway with controlled certainty. No one rushed. No one stood early. People waited. They smiled at one another. A small, ordinary miracle born from systems that no longer rewarded aggression. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Daniel thought about the moment that had started everything. The snap of fingers, the command delivered with confidence borrowed from history and habit. He thought about how small it had seemed at the time, how ordinary, how easily it could have been ignored. That was the danger. Most damage was never loud. It was casual. It was efficient, justified. They disembarked into a terminal that moved with purpose instead of panic. Staff greeted passengers with eye contact, with patience. A young agent helped a man with a cane without being asked. A supervisor thanked an employee quietly for handling a delay with grace. No cameras followed Daniel. No one whispered his name. That was by design. Outside the terminal, a row of taxis waited. Rain had just passed, leaving the pavement dark and reflective. Daniel and Rachel stepped into the cool air together, pausing for a moment under the overhang. The city beyond hummed, unaware and unchanged, as cities always were. Rachel looked at him. "Do you think people really learned something?" Daniel considered the question without answering it directly. He thought of Karen taping boxes in a warehouse, moving faster than she needed to, surrounded by reminders she could never escape. He thought of Ethan in an orange vest, invisible now, stripped of the armor he had mistaken for identity. He thought of the gate agents who now hesitated before making a call, aware that power no longer lived where it once had. "I think," Daniel said, "they learned that silence is a choice." Rachel smiled softly. They walked toward their car, disappearing into the flow of ordinary lives, just another couple among millions. No entourage, no announcement. The work didn't require it. Behind them, the airline continued to operate. Flights departed on time. People arrived safely. Employees went home without stories of being shouted down or bribed. No one snapped their fingers anymore, at least not without thinking twice. And that was the real ending. Not revenge, not humiliation. Correction. A reminder written not in policy manuals, but in behavior, in pauses, in the way people now looked at one another before deciding who mattered. Because, in the end, the most dangerous mistake wasn't underestimating a man in a hoodie. It was forgetting that dignity does not have a dress code, and power does not always announce itself. If this story moved you, take a moment to like it, subscribe for more stories like this, and comment below with 3 simple words. Respect is power.